We're live. So thanks for everybody coming here so early in the morning. My name is Carol Hudler. I'm the CEO of Cumberland Region Tomorrow, and we've got a great presentation for you today. I wanted to thank, before I turn it over to our mayor, Shane McFarland, I wanted to thank HDR for our breakfast. If you haven't had some, you might want to. There's some really great biscuits there. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mayor McFarland, who's going to welcome everybody and our speaker. Thank you.
We're going to change the topic for today, that we're going to spend the hour talking on when the bridge over Broad is going to be finished. So it's December 17th, isn't that right, Mr. Lyons? So December 17th, we're excited that the bridge over Broad is going to be finished. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to the city of Murfreesboro today. We have several special guests here that I do want to recognize before we get started. Representative Dawn White is here. My favorite mayor, Mary Esther Reed, is here from Smyrna. We have Charlie Baum, who's here, who's a county commissioner. Pettis Reed, who's here, is a county commissioner. Did I miss anyone? Where's Shanto? Shanto Sorrento is here. He's also a county commissioner. So Shanto, it's always good to see you. One of the biggest things that we as local elected officials talk about is transportation. That is by far, when we talk about growth, the first thing that residents will catch us in the grocery store, on the ball fields. They want to talk about the transportation that's actually in our area. Rhonda, I didn't see you back there. Rhonda's also with the county commission. Good to see you. So we know that that's not just a Murfreesboro issue. We know that that's not just a Smyrna, a Laverne, or a Nashville issue. That's really a regional issue. As a small business owner, and also us trying to recruit economic opportunities, if people can't get to and from their schools, if they can't get to and from their homes, if they can't get to and from their businesses, if their customers can't get to their businesses, then that's something that affects the entire region. So we're excited to be able to partner and be able to work with Joanne, with the Transit Alliance, to be able to hopefully find a solution. One of the things we're excited about is that y'all got to drive to Murfreesboro this morning, because on Channel 2, as I was leaving early this morning, it took an hour. They were showing that it was an hour and 14 minutes to be able to get from Murfreesboro to Nashville. And we have 35,000 residents in Rutherford County who travel I-24 every day. We just finished our 2035 study, and the city of Murfreesboro, the residents in our community compared to the seven counties, spend more time on the road than any other community. So this is something that we are all vested in and want to be able to solve. So with that, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Steve Bland. Steve came to us in 2014, has provided leadership in our region. He's been able to provide a course of direction and action to show us on how that we can improve and help with our entire community. So Steve, the podium's yours.
Well, thank you, Mayor McFarland. And we were talking earlier coming out of Nashville. I will come to a meeting in Murfreesboro first thing in the morning anytime. Please don't ask me to come out here in the evening for the reasons that we're talking about. I would be remiss if I didn't start by thanking and acknowledging, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Regional Transportation Authority is and how it fits into the mobility framework for Middle Tennessee, but I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the members of the RTA board who represent Rutherford County very ably, and several of them are here, and a couple of them were not able to make it, but leading with Mayor Ernest Burgess of Rutherford County. Ernest has been, one of those folks. It's a 39-member board. It's a really large board, and Ernest is one of those folks who really steps up and not only provides leadership to the entire organization, but really represents Rutherford County very well. Mayor McFarland, of course, and his delegates with the city of Murfreesboro are represented on the board, as well as he mentioned Mayor Reed. I didn't see Mayor Reed yet. Good morning, Mayor Reed, another terrific leader in our region. Mayor Waldron from Laverne, and Paula Mansfield, who represents Rutherford County as a governor's appointee to the RTA board. The Regional Transportation Authority, I refer to it as a true collaborative effort of the region. It's created in state law. It doesn't have what I'll call a specific charter or funding source. It really survives and thrives based on the collaboration of the cities and counties in Middle Tennessee, the 10 cities and counties, or the 10 counties and the cities within them that surround the Nashville core. So counties like Rutherford County, Williamson, Davidson, and it really is that collaboration that makes it work. There's nothing compelling Mayor Reed to come to meetings or participate actively in the authority. It is that sense of regional collaboration. And Mayor McFarland mentioned that I did come to the Middle Tennessee region from other parts of the country, and I think it's something unique here. So, when you're struggling with whether it's, bridge construction or the traffic on I-24, the one thing that we have going for us is the collaboration of those regional partners. So I'm going to start with a bit of the stuff that you already know, putting a finer point on it, and then talk about some of the things that are in the works. And these things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Graves with the Transit Alliance to talk about some issues going on at the state level. But frankly, I find these work best. We had a terrific one up in Sumner County when we hear more from you, whether it's questions or points of view or discussion, as opposed to let's just run through some slides. So with respect to the things that you do know, it's population growth in our 10-county region, and there are very few counties and very few cities that aren't experiencing it. And this side of the region, Rutherford County, Williamson County, are experiencing it exponentially, and you all know that. When I started here, people would say, well, why would we look at a mass transit solution anywhere in our region? That doesn't seem to be something that would work in Middle Tennessee. But in point of fact, we are growing to a point in the next 20 to 30 years where we are going to be larger than cities that now have very effective mass transit solutions. And as I tell people, you will pry my steering wheel out of my cold, dead hand. It's not about getting you out of your car. It's about providing a range of mobility options for people in Middle Tennessee for whom it works. And driving out here this morning, watching that steady stream of very slow-moving cars coming in the other direction, and frankly, with all of the outreach we did in Rutherford County and beyond, a lot of those folks are looking for options. So I think as community leaders, as elected officials, as appointed leaders, it's incumbent on us to start providing them. This gives you the growth patterns. I always tell people it's pretty obvious that I will never run for elected office, because one of the things I say, particularly when I come out to Rutherford County, when you look at a chart like this, however bad traffic is today, it's probably as good as it's going to get. So looking for those options and looking for those solutions is really going to be key for all of us. And that chart, when I look at that chart, living in Davidson County and the growth that we're seeing there, frankly, that pales in comparison to what you're seeing in Rutherford County, pales into comparison to Williamson County. So frankly, it is an issue that's critically important. Now, in the Nashville region, one of the hottest issues, transportation is a hot issue, there's no doubt about it. But right in Nashville and Davidson County, it's sort of running neck and neck and maybe being overtaken a little bit by the cost of housing and the affordability of housing. And you all know that one of the true competitive advantages you have is housing is still pretty reasonable out here. But when we add together, as more and more regions are, the cumulative cost of housing and transportation, that's where regions see their competitive advantage. So from the perspective of regional planners, folks who work with the Nashville Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, folks we work with at TDOT, folks we work with in general in our cities and counties, competitive advantage will come to those areas that are kind of able to figure out that happy balance of, well, I can get to all the places I need to get to reasonably fast, whether that's an in-county commute or it's a downtown Nashville work commute or Williamson County work commute or getting in for entertainment and other purposes. The reverse commute, a lot of what we heard through our planning process wasn't necessarily about from residents of Rutherford County saying, how do I get to Nashville or how do I get to Williamson County? A lot of it was, and I see Paul here, a lot of it was from the business community saying, how do I get access to a broader workforce? And that's important as well in looking at the reverse commute. Here's what you're seeing on our roads, and again, it's always instructive to come to places like Rutherford County at this time of the morning, because I took a number of pictures as I was coming out of traffic in the oncoming direction, and it's pretty striking. Over a third of our time during peak hours is spent in congestion in this commute, and it is costing a lot of money. So what has come up during, whether it was the debate over roadway funding in the Improve Act or discussion in the RTA and motion plan, is, well, how can we afford to do this stuff? You're talking about potentially billions and billions of dollars of investment over a period of years. And I think this slide highlights the opposite question. I'd answer a question with a question: how can we afford not to? And I can recall when the governor was doing his listening sessions around the state prior to the Improve Act, talking specifically about a story that his wife told him that was a Rutherford County story. And that was, it's a particular child care center here in Rutherford County taking great pride in saying, we've extended our hours and we're offering dinner for families because folks who are working in Nashville just can't get here in time to pick up their kids. So if that isn't suggesting something about, where we need to put regional priorities, I'm not sure what is. So every day, and Mayor McFarland alluded to the volume of Rutherford County people who are traveling on I-24, which is considerable. When you add that to the other out-of-county commuting, essentially the city of Smyrna leaves Rutherford County every day to go to work. And that's a striking number. And those trends aren't headed in the other direction. Doesn't mean there isn't job growth here, right, Paul? There's tremendous job growth here. But that cross flow of commuters, and we see this all over the place. Davidson County, the out-migration of commuters, is very striking as well. So again, looking at those from a mass transit perspective, it's looking at those key congested corridors and saying, how can we provide a competitive advantage? More information, more data, stuff that you can say, well, numbers are fine, but I already know that when I try to commute in. I know our mayors do. We know when it's a particularly bad day. We refer to the day that all the mayors come in as the alphabet soup meetings for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the RTA, and the Greater Nashville Regional Council. And we know when it's really bad on I-24 when the entire Rutherford County delegation is 20 minutes late getting into a meeting. So we do tend to hold up voting until you all get here. But that's something, obviously, that we work with on a day-to-day basis, and you all see on a day-to-day basis. And, of course, the folks that are here are the people who didn't have to be in that today. Maybe you'll be in it tomorrow or at some other point in the future. So talk about some of the things we're doing, and I want to acknowledge all of the stuff that happens has to happen in partnerships. People say, what can the RTA do? What can TDOT do? What can the city of Murfreesboro do? What can Rutherford County do? And the answer, I think, by ourselves is really not much at all. But together, it's a very powerful force. And I know we have Shane Hester's here from TDOT, Region 3. So, and I see Brad Freeze. So I'm going to touch on some of Brad's stuff. So I said earlier, and I'll say this to the whole group, to some of the folks I know in the group, I said, I'll take the softball questions and we'll let people like Shane and Brad take the really tough questions about what's going on. But I think one of the most important projects, and I think in talking to Commissioner Schroer at TDOT, talking to folks like Brad at TDOT, one of the things they are, and frankly we are most excited about, is starting to happen in the I-24 corridor between Nashville and Murfreesboro, and that's what's referred to as TDOT's I-24 Smart Corridor Initiative. And the idea is, frankly, that what I'll call heavy construction projects, which will continue to be necessary, obviously, and the expansion of capacity will continue to be necessary, but frankly, before we can spend all of those dollars, it's about using the assets we have in the most effective and efficient way possible. And those assets could be highway capacity, they could be access points on the highway, they could be land use implications, and they can be mass transit. So the idea of the intelligent traffic systems as applied to a smart corridor is coordinating all the data and all the resources available to make most effective use. So for instance, it could be about better alerting motorists to what their transit options are. One of the things that TDOT is examining in concert with the RTA and other players like the cities and counties is what's referred to as bus on shoulder has been effectively used in other cities and other regions as a relatively low-cost way to improve transit service reliability. So looking at how feasible that is, where it might be feasible, where it might be implemented. When we did the long-range planning efforts for the RTA, particularly here in Rutherford County, and very often, doesn't matter where I am in the region, I point to a particular conversation I had with one lady from Rutherford County. The conversation actually took place in Nashville. But our planning folks, we did what you typically do. You have all the boards and the discussion things, and you're posting sticky notes and saying what you'd want. And a lady walked up to me looking particularly irritated and said, and by the way, I come from the Northeast, so after I met this lady, I said, well, you're not from the South, are you? She came up to me and said, look, it's pretty simple, stupid. If you make it faster and more reliable than my car, I'll take it, and so will everybody else. So as we kind of went through the design process, that was sort of my theme for what we were looking at. How do we make things demonstrably more reliable and faster for commuters? And I think, and I'll invite Brad to weigh in at any time, although I always get nervous when he sits sort of in the back corner of the room, that a lot of it is about measurement and reliability of the systems. So that if there's an issue on I-24 causing excessive delay, what are the options that are available so we can start offloading some of that load on that roadway into other resources, whether that's a mass transit resource, whether it might be a parallel route, whether it might be giving you an early enough alert that you can adjust your schedule if you can do that. So a lot of it's about communicating better with motorists and other travelers. Things like ramp metering, which you may have seen in other cities, which sort of smooths out the flow, getting on and off the highway at certain times. Signal coordination, one of the things that we're working toward with TDOT and the cities in the corridor, including Nashville, Smyrna, Laverne, and Murfreesboro, is looking at our signals in the Murfreesboro Road corridor. And in fact, within the next couple of weeks, I should have checked on this yesterday, in Nashville, the Metro Transit Authority, the City of Nashville, and TDOT are collaborating on a Murfreesboro Road project within Davidson County that will improve about 42 intersections in Davidson County along Murfreesboro Road. Those improvements will include pedestrian connections so that maybe we can see some of our vehicle load lifted when they're very short trips by improving the pedestrian capacity. It also improves our ability to provide mass transit by making bus stops more accessible and the surrounding areas more accessible. We're putting in several what are called queue jumps that help define transit reliability by saying if we come to a congested intersection, essentially that bus might get to leapfrog the rest of the traffic that's sitting at that intersection. And also looking at adaptive modern traffic signals that kind of go off the measurement of overall traffic flow. How many of us have been kind of irritated when we're sitting at that red light and there's nothing coming the other way, and there's nothing coming the other way for 30 or 45 seconds. So, doing more with the data to inform those systems and incorporating into that network transit signal priority for mass transit. So in our Murfreesboro Road corridor in Nashville, where we run what we refer to as bus rapid transit light service, the ability to extend greens for a little bit, get a little bit of an early green for a little bit, again, to help build the reliability of that system. So I would encourage you, as we get into discussion, to ask more about that. And Brad, you are not leaving the room. Because I had to drop out of engineering school because I couldn't handle the math. Brad can handle the math. Here's some of the things, and I know Joanne's going to talk some about the Improve Act, so I won't go through it in detail. But it was a significant accomplishment, I think, for our regional leadership, certainly for Governor Haslam. It was a huge initiative of his administration. Commissioner Schroer, I sat down with him a couple weeks ago. I said, now I feel like I can take up some of your time since you don't have to be all consumed by the Improve Act. And particularly, I want to thank and acknowledge the regional mayors. I mean, the Middle Tennessee Mayor's Caucus was probably the leading force, without meaning to cut anybody out, like the chambers, Paul, in the advocacy for that, because they were way out in front very early in saying this is something that we need. And there will be very tangible projects coming out of the Improve Act that Rutherford County and other counties obviously will be able to see, tangible results from. But with all that, this is what we sort of refer to, what I always refer to, again, I'm not running for office, as the slide of doom. It's a map of the 7-county region covered by the Nashville Area Metropolitan Planning Organization that shows roadway segments in 2010 that were routinely congested. So this is generally demand-based congestion. It's not, well, there's bad weather, or there's an accident or an incident creating that congestion. And then it projects it out to 2040. And you all know where Murfreesboro and Rutherford County are on this slide. I don't think I have to point it out that many approaches are going to be necessary, frankly, beyond, the specific projects included in the Improve Act, for us to work through this. And that's a dialogue we want to keep going in Rutherford County and the region. The reason, frankly, the RTA is continuing to do these things, our long-range plan was adopted last year by the boards, and we're working toward carrying out as many of those projects as we can. But we think the dialogue is important because it would be easy, frankly, for community leadership, the general public, to say, well, you passed the Improve Act, you adopted your plans, you're working on your projects, now you can leave us alone. And frankly, we can't leave you alone, and you shouldn't leave us alone, because these things require constant attention. And we know that there's meeting fatigue, and people kind of get tired of coming to these things. But the turnout this morning suggests to me that certainly in Rutherford County, everybody knows this is a huge issue, and we need to keep advancing it, and we need to keep the pressure on solutions moving forward. The mass transit pitch is simply one of efficiency and space. I think historically I've worked in the mass transit industry for over 30 years, trying to suppress the urge. I always roll my eyes, oops, when I say that, because it's been a long time. But we've sort of kind of evolved as an industry from, well, it's a social service, it's something we do for people who can't drive or don't want to drive, to now in the cities that are kind of getting it, saying it is part of economic development, and it is part of building an efficient transportation network. Because the honest truth is, and I see Shane, and I see Brad, and I see other folks from TDOT here, if we wanted to make I-24 big enough to accommodate all of the traffic volume that we can expect here over the next 25 years, it would take every penny of TDOT's budget and then some to handle that. And that's an unrealistic expectation. So it is about finding the most efficient way to move people and goods in a specific situation. And when we look at that very specific, I'll even go more specific, that Rutherford County to downtown Nashville corridor, because we can make roadway improvements at Hickory Hollow, we can make roadway improvements in Smyrna and Laverne. Once you get inside the inner loop of Nashville, which is where it all tends to bog down, it gets extremely difficult. And that's why we think for the region and for areas like Rutherford County, that what Nashville does is very important. A lot of you probably heard Mayor Berry in Nashville has every intention in Davidson County of going out in the spring for a referendum to do a multi-billion-dollar transit program. And it would be very easy in Rutherford County to say, oh, that's their business, that's Nashville, that has nothing to do with us. That could very well have an awful lot to do with Rutherford County if one of the things we're able to start doing is start deploying, for instance, light rail on Murfreesboro Road and create an effective feeder network. Now, all of a sudden, that part of the region that gets most seriously congested, is it going to be uncongested? No. But it will have greater throughput, greater carrying capacity, and you will see an awful lot of people move over to that option. So even if you say, well, the nature of my job won't allow me to use it, or I'm going to a place where it's not going to run, or what have you, we're seeing enough volume in the origins and destinations of trips to say that it could be very effective. And over time, what we've seen with those investments around the country is you will see growth and development occur around them so that more and more trips can occur on them. So I would encourage you to kind of stay informed about what's happening in Davidson County. I know talking to a lot of the mayors who shall remain nameless, they said, we're very interested to see what happens, and if it goes well, maybe we'll talk about something in our county. So definitely, you know, that the county lines aren't border walls. Pay attention to what's going on in Davidson County. Let's see, a lot of the slides in here the folks put in, I'll kind of speed through them so that we can move on to discussion. So the N-Motion plan, which was adopted by the MTA and RTA boards back last fall, calls for a wide range of transit options in Middle Tennessee that are very context specific. So you'll see very different approaches in downtown Nashville than you would say between Franklin and Murfreesboro, as an example. And for people who want more information about what was recommended and what was adopted and what we're moving toward, we would encourage you to go to the nmotion2016.org website. We were very actively partnering with a whole variety of folks and organizations like Cumberland Region Tomorrow, the Transit Alliance, many, many others on putting it together. We were pleased to get over 20,000 engagements, so thousands of folks participated, whether it be in meetings or surveys or social media forums or what have you, and very consistent takes from people. So we feel very strongly about the outcomes of the plan. In Rutherford County, what we focused on was, we took a little bit of heat in that I refer to it as the everybody loves a train syndrome. We didn't recommend in our regional commute corridors as much rail service because now the rail network in Middle Tennessee, if you look at it, would be a brilliant commuter network. Murfreesboro, straight line into Nashville, Franklin, straight line into Nashville, Gallatin, straight line into Nashville, etc. Challenge is we carry an awful lot of freight on that line. And A, CSX isn't particularly interested in interfering with that freight. But B, from an economic development perspective, you know, if we were able to come up with a beautiful passenger rail network that worked fantastically, but Nissan couldn't get parts to the Smyrna plant, I'm not sure that that helps our economic development objectives. So what we focused on was something we refer to as freeway bus rapid transit, and that's working with TDOT incrementally and hopefully eventually to a full-blown dedicated bus rapid transit system in the I-24 corridor that allows those vehicles and potentially others through a managed lane scenario. So it could be carpool, van pool, ultimately autonomous vehicles. You know, we talk a lot about what autonomous vehicles can do to speed that throughput. The other advantage, and we see it in Wilson County with the Music City Stars, if you have a train sort of out here and you have 30,000 commuters a day over here and they don't see it, they don't necessarily think about it. Where when we were studying the bus on shoulder approaches, one of the things that was very effective is if you're sitting still in that traffic day after day and you keep watching this vehicle kind of blow by you on the interstate, it's got the website and the phone number, it's that subliminal advertising, you know, that can be very effective. So trying to work toward how we make service faster and more reliable. And then the other goal is, because of the job growth in Rutherford County and the job growth in Williamson County, is starting to do, right now the RTA is really dominant on Nashville-based commuter trips, but working with folks like Murfreesboro Rover, Franklin Transit on kind of getting a complete network. And that's where you see those little green clouds around Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne, is expanding that local transit network to help feed that system. So I'm going to turn it over to Joanne and then hopefully some really good conversation. And I'm going to be blocking the door so our TDOT friends can't leave the room before that comes up. But really what we want to do is, first of all, thank you for being here this morning, showing interest, showing ongoing interest. I see a lot of the same faces from other meetings. And we hope you'll continue the dialogue and help us at the RTA and your regional leadership, elected and appointed, and state leadership from folks like TDOT in moving mobility in our region and in Rutherford County in the right direction. So, Joanne?
Thanks, Steve. And good morning. Okay, at least I know everybody's awake. I am Joanne Graves, and I'm with the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee. I want to call attention to a sheet you have laying in each one of your seats. And it talks about what transit means for Rutherford County on the front, and it gives you some demographics. But what I'd like to call your attention to is what it says on the back when it talks about the Improve Act. And the Improve Act is also affectionately known by many of you as the gas tax bill. So that may be the way that you remember it as opposed to the Improve Act. We were very excited that this bill passed. In this legislation was language that allows cities and counties to control their own destiny as it relates to funding for transit. You know, it used to be we went to the federal government and we asked for money and it came down and we did all the projects. That doesn't happen anymore. The state, while they are very supportive of transit, have limited dollars to build all these systems. And the burden of responsibility for some of the funding of transit is going to fall to the cities and the counties. What this legislation did, it allows cities and counties that qualify to put a question of putting a surcharge on existing taxes directly on the ballot. And the people of that city and county vote whether they want to do that or whether they do not. Now, I want to be real clear about one thing. Nobody from the federal government's going to come and tell you to put that referendum on the ballot. And nobody from the state is coming to tell you to put a referendum on the ballot. This is driven by the people of that city or that county to decide it's something they want to do and then move forward with being able to put it on the ballot. It does not have to go to the General Assembly. State legislature does not have to approve what the people in Rutherford County may say they want to do as it relates to transit. This is a major deviation from the way we've done business in the past. Used to be anything that you wanted to raise, a fee, a surcharge, a tax, had to go to the legislature. Don't have to do that anymore. But there is a very distinct process that you have to follow in order to be able to do this. Number one, the surcharge can only be put on 6 already existing revenue streams. Sales tax, business taxes, hotel, motel, there's a development tax, several of those that you are allowed to put a surcharge on if the people vote to say they want to do that. If the people say, if you put it on the ballot and the people vote it down, it doesn't happen. And then you'll have to regroup and decide where to head from there. But it's real important because we all know transit is an alternative for all of us as far as dealing with congestion. And for the first time, cities and counties have the ability to say, we want to come up with a source of revenue that helps us move a transportation system forward. And we can do that collaboratively as the citizens and collectively as the citizens. We're not going to have state representatives or federal representatives come in and tell us what we have to do to control what we want happening in our city or our county. Now, one of the things that has to happen in order for you to put a measure on the ballot, and this is first step, you have to form a citizens group that needs to evaluate what priorities, what transit you might want to put on the ballot. The Metropolitan Planning Organization has a list of approved projects for your area. It's not like you're going to have to pull projects out of the air. But the citizens group, which really needs to be reflective of the entire county, need to set the priorities about what they want to happen first or second or third. You will make that decision. You will, the citizens. RTA's not coming in to tell you what to do. The Transit Alliance not going to come tell you what to do. You will make that decision. We will assist you if we were asked to come in and help you. The Metropolitan, TDOT, any of those folks will help you. But you all will decide what your priorities are. Then you would decide which revenue source you wanted to put a surcharge on. Then that has to be approved by a third party. We say the comptroller. Most of the time it would be the comptroller, but it could be another third party. Has to be approved to make sure that the revenue source you're using would generate the funds that you say it will. Just has to be confirmed and validated. It's not a difficult process, and I certainly am not trying to make it. You just need a citizens group, representative of the county. You need to identify what revenue source you would want to put a surcharge on. You have to have it signed off by a third party, and then it goes on the ballot as a referendum, and then it has to be voted on. It's important that the counties and the cities, even if you're not thinking you're going to do a referendum tomorrow, and you probably couldn't because it takes a little while to go through this process, you ought to go ahead and form a citizens group. And you really ought to start looking at your projects and start identifying which ones you might want to move forward with first. That sounds so easy, but you put a group of folks in a room and everybody's got a different opinion. As we know, for those who are in elected office, everybody has a different opinion. So the first step is to go ahead and form a committee and start looking at your projects. That may take you a year to get consensus about what you want to move forward with. And then once you've identified your projects, going forward from there becomes a lot easier. But building consensus is not always an easy thing. Welcome, Senator Tracy. How are you? I'm glad to have you here. So that's the first thing you need to do. Establish a citizens group, start identifying your road projects. Once you've done that, determine which revenue source you think you might like to put a surcharge on. And from there, you'll get a lot of assistance as far as trying to put it on the ballot. This is what Mayor Berry is doing, and she's going to have a referendum in May of 2018. That's the last we've heard, May of 2018. It's not a difficult process. You just need to start, and that's what I'm here to encourage you to do, is go ahead and take that first step. Work with your mayors, work with your county mayor, and come up with a citizens group that can look at your projects and identify them. And again, if you need any assistance from several of the agencies that are here, they'll be glad to assist you in any way. So the good news is you have a method available to you to do whatever it is that you say you want to do as far as a transit system. And you control that destiny, and that's something we've never had before. So I encourage you to take a look at it, move forward with it, work with your mayors, work with your county executive, and take that first step. Thank you.
So we've been talking way too long and way too much. Any questions, any discussion, any observations, any sense of direction? Somebody's going to, don't make me volunteer someone. Paula. This is too quiet. Sumner was very animated. We're not going to make this a competition, but I got to tell you, Sumner County was like really animated. Of course, it was after work, so that might have had something to do with it. Touche. Paul, okay. I didn't mean it.
Just talk about the numbers of Rutherford County, how many are actually riding?
Yeah.
Now, where are the parking rides, what those trends are telling you?
Right. So one of the issues, one of the things I would say from a mass transit perspective, and if you didn't hear Paula's question, it was, to ask me to describe, well, what is the mass transit service that's available regionally? And I know Jim Kerr and the folks from Murfreesboro are here, and they can talk specifically to what the Rover system does here in Murfreesboro. And I know they're planning some major new facilities and improvements with respect to the Rover and the city. But in the regional context, we run a fair amount of commuter service direct from Murfreesboro, Laverne, and Smyrna into Nashville. And what I would tell you, it's a good news, bad news piece. There's a pretty dedicated user base, and this I think ties into something that Joanne said about determining your own destiny. We rely on park and ride. I refer to them as charity park and rides, by and large. Businesses or churches or municipalities just provide the RTA with, sure, you can have people park here and you can run your bus here, pick them up, get them into the city. Well, the peril of all the growth we're having is we have been chased out of more park and rides in the last probably 3 years than in history, including some here in Rutherford County. And the challenge with that is when that happens, in fact, actually next week down in Williamson County, we're losing our Franklin Park and Ride, and we're having to relocate it. Every time it happens, we see a drop in ridership because, you've gotten used to that location. It was convenient for me, and then it takes a while for it to build up. So when we talk about what I'll call short and mid-range plans for the RTA, particularly in areas like Rutherford County, and I know Jim and I have this conversation pretty frequently, it's actually identifying those financial resources where we can acquire good property, for that type of a service. So we've actually seen a bit of a ridership decline in the Rutherford County corridor, and in large part it's because we've lost 2 or 3 sites over the last couple years, and people just sort of drop when that reliability isn't there. In contrast, in Montgomery County, we partnered with TDOT. They were doing a major interchange improvement along I-20, the opposite end of I-24, up in Clarksville. And we were able to, well, we didn't do much. TDOT did all the work. So, Brad, Shane, please tell the commissioner I said that. To develop really a first-class park and ride facility, and we've seen ridership within a year increase about 35%, with very little other change in the service. So that's sort of a key thing up front. And I would tell you, anyone who has an interest, it's very much a commuter-oriented system. But 2 of the challenges we have with the park and rides and the fact that, gee, if I'm going to hop on that bus and sit in the same I-24 traffic that I would in my car, that takes away the convenience factor. So if you want to know what the game changers would be, it would be really solid park and ride facilities and some level of priority, whether we're able to do bus on shoulder or it's the TSP, the signal priority type system, or it's ultimately things like dedicated lanes. Frankly, you would see people coming to the system in droves. I could promise you that. Thanks for getting us started, Paul. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I have a question for those who are here with RTA and MTA.
Mm-hmm.
I live down the street from the nearest RTA bus stop.
Okay.
I was just wondering if it would be possible to put more buses on the route between Murfreesboro and Nashville-Murfreesboro that have a restroom on board.
Yeah, that's a great short-term piece, because I've heard that from a number. Look, if I have to sit in this traffic and it's going to be an hour and 40 minutes, could I at least have a restroom? One of the projects we've actually applied for funding for is to get more. So right now, on the Rutherford County corridors for RTA, the Metro Transit Authority operates that service, and then Gray Line operates in our other corridors. So one of the things that we are applying for funding for is new dedicated equipment for RTA commuter routes that would include, it would be branded more as an RTA service, because frankly that's a criticism we get as well. That Gray Line bus, I don't know, is it a commuter bus or is it taking people to the casino in Indiana? And the other piece is having things like restroom facilities on them. So yeah, that is in the, again, I'll come back to the short and mid-range plan, so within the next 3-4 years. Yes, ma'am.
Plans to add the buses that will leave Nashville earlier, get sort of an
Yeah. In the longer range and motion plan, coming back to Joanne's conversation, what I'll call greater frequency of service and earlier and later service. And that's not just limited to the Murfreesboro or the Rutherford County market. For those of you who are familiar with the Music City Star, the commuter train that runs back and forth, it's the number one complaint we get. Service doesn't run early enough or late enough. So included in that in-motion plan is, prioritizing, well, when and where do we need more trips, and then trying to identify the fiscal resources to do that. So coming back to, Joanne's point of, if there were a broader Rutherford County conversation of what broad range of improvements would we like to see, those are conversations we can support with both data, information from other areas to say, and frankly, it's how the conversation started in Davidson County with Mayor Barry, and the group that she put together was looking at the in-motion plan saying, okay, what are the things? And when you see what Nashville and Davidson County come out with, a lot of it will look very much like the in-motion plan. Some of it's going to look different, because of that process to generate, locally preferred projects. But earlier service, more frequent service, and then later evening, later afternoon trips and midday trips. One of the things I'll point out to people who might be interested in the commuter service that is a very underknown and maybe underpromoted aspect is, we'll hear from folks, well, it's a rush hour-based service. What happens if my kid's sick in the middle of the day, or I have an emergency at home in the middle of the day? We actually do, through the RTA, offer a guaranteed ride home program where commuters have a certain number. So if you have that emergency, we can put you in a taxi, or what might be Lyft or whatever the system is to get you back on that emergency. It is used occasionally, so we know some people do use it, but it's not overused. The fear everybody has, oh my God, people are just going to be taking taxis all over the place, going to cost a fortune. People truly do use it for how it's intended, that emergency in the middle of the day. Yes, sir.
The bus on the shoulder sounds like some of the low-hanging fruit since all the infrastructure there. I'm curious, how does that work for the on-ramps, the off-ramps, and emergency?
Yeah. This is where I might have to start. Oh, no, I think Brad left the room. Oh, no. Yeah. But it is a true, and I'll welcome you on any of this, Brad, but it is absolutely a true, you have to investigate the engineering feasibility. Do you want to weigh in before I get too deep? A lot of where that you see it's been implemented, and I want to thank and congratulate TDOT on a lot of the engineering work that's been done, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is you put it in place and it's not safe or it's not reliable. But places that have done it effectively have found it to be safe, and some of the operating constraints, and Brad alluded to them, is you're not going to do it above a certain speed. And even when let's say traffic's at a standstill, the bus wouldn't be flying up the shoulder at 70 miles an hour. Typically, it's restricted to 10 to 15 miles an hour above the ambient traffic condition. That doesn't sound like much, but we had a group go up to Minneapolis where they've been doing this for 20-some years, about a year or so ago, and they took us out on one of their bus-on-shoulder applications. And when traffic's sitting still and you're doing 10 miles an hour, it feels like you are absolutely flying. And then coming back to some of Brad's point on design and the interchanges, a lot of it revolves around, first of all, pavement depth is key, the geometry of the interchanges. So you might very well have a situation where an interchange just does not allow for you to do it through the interchange. So there's actually directional signage that would say to the bus operator, you got to get back in traffic right here and then get past that interchange. So the advantage, I like people, so what about a broken down car? So here's the advantage a bus has that a train doesn't. If there's something in the way, there's this round thing in front of the driver that he can activate to actually move around an obstacle. Where I know on the rail side, like people talk about streetcars, and I've worked in cities that had streetcar-like operations. When there's a car parked in front of the streetcar, you wait until the car gets towed away. So those are some of the issues and why it's, you're right, it's low-hanging fruit, but like most things, it's not quite as simple, you know, as it might sound. Yes, ma'am.
Sort of a follow-up to that, would it be possible to utilize and enforce the HOV lane to allow
Yeah, that is probably be telling tales out of school on Commissioner Schroer, because that was when he became commissioner. He told me this story. That was one of the first things he heard. You know, well, what could we do at TDOT to, or why don't you enforce the HOV lanes? And that's a political hot potato. And what you find around the country is when you add capacity, it's easy to constrain it. So a key to, for instance, bus on shoulder, one of the concerns that we would have, that TDOT would have, that the state police would have was, well, if all of a sudden as a motorist you're watching buses go past you on the shoulder, are you going to kind of jump in behind them and follow? So enforcing that, no, it's not for a general motorist use. And what's been found from a public acceptance standpoint is people will generally accept that, or people would accept, well, TDOT's going to expand the capacity of the roadway, but we're going to use it in a managed lane environment. People will accept that. Frankly, when you move toward, we're going to take something that hasn't been enforced, and we're going to, quote, take it away, people tend to kind of freak out a little bit. So that's sort of the challenge with the, you know, well, gee, I've been driving on this thing for the last 10 years, and now all of a sudden you're telling me I can't. You know, again, I'm not running for office, so I could probably try to do it, but there's a lot of pushback on it. And at the end of the day, you know, for both folks like the RTA, the Metro Transit Authority, TDOT, we're all kind of learning each other's spaces. And the thing we have in common, whatever projects we want to pursue, the two overriding goals are, how do we improve the safety and the throughput of whatever the facility is? So if we're doing something that, for lack of a better word, reduces the carrying capacity, we want to be really careful about it. Yes, sir.
Ms. Graves mentioned 4 of the 6 current revenue sources to which the surcharge could be applied. What are the other 2? And what proposal that she's putting on the
Yeah. Straining, so you're going to strain my memory. I know it's sales tax, wheel tax, business tax, hotel, motel. For property, I think is off the. Brad, do you remember? You guys remember? So there's a development tax.
Property tax for some cities, wheel tax, development tax, hotel, motel, and then some enterprise business tax.
We can get that information to folks. In terms of what Nashville's doing right now, so what's happening is they are in the process. Joanne talked about the process to get it on the ballot, and the process involves developing that program of projects with a financing plan. So we want to deliver A, B, C, D, E. Here's how we intend to pay for it. Here's when we intend to deliver based on that financing plan. Financing plan has to be reviewed by an independent auditor that is approved by the state comptroller. Then in Nashville's case, it has to be approved by the Metro Council. So it would probably be something like the county legislature here, and then it can get on the ballot. And where Nashville is with it right now is the program of projects and the financing plan are being finalized. We expect that will be released. It has to go through a comment process before it's approved, so a public comment process. And we expect that by mid to late October, that will be released. So right now, The financing plan is running a whole bunch of scenarios, so there's not like a final determination of this tax or that tax or how much, but that will be part of what's issued in mid to late October. So keep an eye on that. Yes, sir.
We all recognize something's got to be done about I-24. And looking at the proposal here, it's going to be very difficult for local governments like
Right.
Murfreesboro and Rutherford County to raise enough money on these streams to really have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can see Metro Nashville with the resources that they have to be able to have a pretty good impact. But Rutherford County and Murfreesboro are not going to be able to raise enough money in the streams that we have.
Right.
To have an impact. Then, are we saying that the federal government and the state government is not going to continue their support?
Sure. That's a great question, and absolutely, I would say everything you've said is accurate. And again, I'll use Nashville as an example in the financing plan. That's not to say this is what would happen in Rutherford County or Wilson County or anywhere else. But there is an assumption of federal support based on reasonably anticipated programs. So it's not a guarantee. But how that local money leverages other sources. And I'm not going to throw TDOT or the state under the bus and say, yeah, TDOT would be invested in it. But I think every funder, federal, state, corporate, is looking at, well, what's the return on investment? And when Joanne says, you know, cities and counties will have to start taking things into their own hands, you're a whole lot more likely to get a good response from Washington, D.C., or from, you know, the state, if it's, we've come to these conclusions in our community, these are the goals we're trying to accomplish, they're consistent with statewide and national goals with respect to transportation and mobility, and we're willing to be kind of first in the bucket, and we need your help. Where I think historically what's happened is, hey, let's go to Washington and see if we can get a whole bunch of money, and if we can, we'll do a project, and if we can't, we won't. And what's happened is, and around the country, frankly, you've seen a lot of projects of what I'll call marginal value because they didn't necessarily have that local buy-in. But I think it's safe to say state's going to be looking at what's a statewide return on investment. And I know talking to state leaders, whether it's the General Assembly or it's the governor's office or it's the commissioner in TDOT, the Murfreesboro to Nashville corridor is a corridor of statewide significance. So I think you're absolutely right. And whether it's Nashville or it's Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, nobody can do it alone. But it's a matter of, okay, let's look at options where there's enough local buy-in, enough local support. Then it becomes much easier for that statewide or that national source to say, yeah, we can absolutely partner with you on this. And if that model didn't work, I can tell you right now, whatever pops out of the Nashville program would not work. Yeah, the numbers just wouldn't match. Yes, sir.
You know I'm a rail guy. I'm Gordon Smith.
Yes, Gordon.
How you doing?
Good.
One of the,
I love trains, by the way.
I used to be at the Mystic City Star. I'm retired now.
Yes.
So I know all the virtues of it. I know what's
The limitations.
living its growth. One of the big bugaboos, as you correctly point out, all the major rail lines in Nashville go all to the right places.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is you got 5 major rail lines that converge on Nashville
Yeah.
and go into the Radnor Rail Yard, which is out of sight, but it is an immense facility.
Mm-hmm. It's huge.
It's an immense facility. Now, CSX has a new CEO. His name is E. Hunter Harris.
Mm-hmm.
He is an entirely different viewpoint on running the railroad. Some say the CSX is in total chaos now because of him. He just came on board last February,
Right.
March. But he's closed the hump
Right.
yard at Radnor. And what he perceives is, number one, you
Right.
And so if you think about one of the big bugaboos, when you had that yard there, every train that came in had to slow down to get into the yard, and had a new train come out, had to slowly get out of the yard, so it blocked up all those main ones. Well, it looks to me if he doesn't get fired before he solves all the problems, there's gonna be some real estate available. I mean, you just think what the
Yeah.
tax bill must be in that CSX.
Oh, yeah.
And so they want to do the business elsewhere, and so if you take that big choke point yard out of the picture,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, things might clear up a little bit.
Yeah, and watching what CSX does and how their business model evolves is going to be really important to the region, frankly, for reasons way beyond mass transit. Because if CSX doesn't do well, frankly, our region will suffer from an industrial development perspective. My challenge with it is you've still got to get trains, freight trains, through the Nashville market. So even if you took Radnor Yard out of the equation, you still have to squeeze an awful lot of freight capacity through those tracks going, whether it's coming out of the southeast up into the Chicago market or coming out of the Port of Memphis going east. And that's sort of where we're, that's where I have kind of the mental challenge of how could this work with passenger rail, because passenger rail has to work on a tight tolerance. We can't say, okay, the train's on time tomorrow, but now we got to wait for a freight, so it's going to be 45 minutes late. So it bears watching, but when Hunter took over CSX, we didn't say, well, let's just abandon the bus rapid transit idea and move back to commuter rail, because the fundamental challenge of freight traffic in the corridor is still pretty daunting.
But I mean, there are systems like the Los Angeles Region Metro Link that coexist with freight trains, and they make it happen. They're not as on time as our municipal
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
it can be
Oh,
done.
it bears watching. It bears watching for sure. I think we're getting the hook.
We are at 8:33, and we could probably have time for one last question, and then I also want to point out there's tons of breakfast left, so if you haven't eaten before, you ought to eat after.
And let me highlight what Carol and Joanna said before. We would love this to be the start or the continuation of a dialogue, as opposed to, oh, that was good, now it's over. Because these issues, the slide of doom isn't going away. So we need to continue the conversations. And we all appreciate, I'll speak for TDOT, Cumberland Region Tomorrow, Transit Alliance, RTA, and our mayors. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning. Thank you.